So after 7 Armored Core games on the PS2, it was finally time for FromSoftware to move on to the next generation of hardware. And much like the transition from PS1 to PS2, the transition from PS2 to PS3 would be defined by an entirely new generation of Armored Core, the 4th generation. One that seems to be a bit controversial among a lot of Armored Core fans, especially those who are fans of the old school games. So what exactly makes Armored Core 4 so different from the rest of the franchise, and how did it turn out? Well, let's talk about it. And before getting too far into the video, I should mention that this is the 12th in a series of videos where I'm playing every Armored Core game for the first time and reviewing them as I go along. And while you don't have to have seen the other videos in order to enjoy this one, you'll be missing a lot of context about my personal journey with these games if you haven't seen them, so I'll have the playlist linked in the description below for those of you that want to check those out first. But with that out of the way, Armored Core 4 is a mech-based third-person shooter developed by FromSoftware and released in 2006 for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. And if you've been paying attention, you might notice that this is the first time an Armored Core game has been released on anything other than a PlayStation system. Only took them 12 entries to get there. And as one last note before talking about the game proper, AC4 is directed by none other than the now infamous household name of Hidetaka Miyazaki. The first game he ever worked on in his game design career was Last Raven, and he was immediately promoted to director just after that for this exact title. And if nothing else speaks to that man's talent, only ever working on one game that he didn't direct says a lot on its own. And much like the introduction of Gen 3, Gen 4 completely reboots the Armored Core timeline. And while there's a lot that makes this reboot interesting, the most important part pertains to the ACs themselves. In Armored Core 4, Ravens have moved on from standard Armored Cores entirely and started to pilot Nexts. These are essentially like a new generation of Armored Cores with capabilities far beyond that of their older cousins. Next pilots are also now referred to as Lynxes rather than Ravens. However, the new naming scheme is a little inconsistent at times. I'm not sure if it's an actual writing issue with the game or simply a handful of localization errors in the Western release, but your Next will be referred to as an AC a couple of times, as well as a couple other characters in the story calling you Raven on occasion. And while we're talking about Next, let's talk about the movement. If there's one word that defines the movement in this game, and honestly this game as a whole, it's speed. Nexts are significantly faster than Armored Cores were, and they're more efficient as well. Boost gliding along the ground no longer drains your generator's energy, flying through the air uses significantly less energy than in previous games, and you can even glide along the top of bodies of water now. On top of that, there's a new quick boost mechanic that can be used to quickly dodge heavy weapons and missiles. The speed of Armored Core 4 is incredibly fun, and the new mechanical depth added by the dramatic increase of aerial combat and being able to dodge missiles and other heavy weapons with a quick boost brings a level of mechanical satisfaction that I haven't gotten from the Armored Core games before. Human Plus features from previous games are also now universal across all Nexts in this game, meaning that if you want to bring a giant sniper cannon on your shoulder, you can fire it off while flying through the air or boost gliding along the ground, rather than needing to leave yourself open to attack like in previous games. The old FCS lockbox is also gone now, being replaced with a simple soft lock system that will aim for any enemies that are within range and on the screen. And while it might sound like this was done to make the game easier, it's simply a change that was made to account for the new speed of the core gameplay. It does make it a lot easier to aim, but considering the pace of the gameplay here, it balances out, since just trying to keep targets on screen while you're moving so quickly can be difficult enough a lot of the time. And the most unique change to your AC's potential here is Primal Armor. This is essentially a powerful energy shield for your Next, powered by Kojima particles. An in-universe energy source that is incredibly powerful, but also incredibly harmful to the environment. So harmful, in fact, that when doing missions in or even close to civilized areas, the use of Kojima particles is strictly prohibited due to how much damage it would do to the region and the surrounding population. But in terms of gameplay, while your primal armor is active, you'll take a normal amount of damage from enemy weapons fire, but once it's depleted, you'll take a ridiculously high amount of damage by comparison and need to play incredibly carefully. At first, I thought primal armor would be a form of making the game easier than the classic gen games, but it actually only makes it more difficult. When your primal armor is up, you'll be playing the game like normal, but once it's down, you are demanded to play near flawlessly in order to stay alive. It's a really fun new system, and honestly, it's one of my favorite additions to Armored Core 4. But once I was done with the tutorial, I was greeted with the menu UI of this game, and
What is that? What the fuck is that?
This is by far the worst menu of the series up to this point, and not just in the sense of how it's laid out. I actually think it is laid out better than a couple of previous entries, but it's just so bland. Like, it's not offensive, but it's genuinely the most uninspired and under-designed menu that I've seen from a game in a really long time. I mean, look at it. It's kind of just nothing. And while I'm on that general topic, let me just say that Armored Core 4 is an ugly game. And it's weird because it's a very stylish game, but it also just looks really bad. And I don't mean that in a, oh, this game is from 2006, of course it looks bad kind of way. I mean it in a, the environments are just really bland kind of way. Most of this game has little to no color in it, being a mix of whites and grays and maybe some sand to spice things up. But there are moments where color is used properly, and this game actually can look pretty good from time to time. It's just that the only time that it does is when there was very clearly an effort made to make it look that way. And one last thing before getting into the campaign itself, the customization for your next is honestly insane in this game. You've got the normal stuff you'd expect: frame parts, weapons on both arms and shoulders, extensions, your FCS, your generator, you know, the usual things that you would expect from Armored Core customization. And on top of that, there are now stabilizers. These are small add-ons that can be attached to the frame parts of your next to offset the center of gravity and offer better control while piloting. This system can be pretty overwhelming, but if you use the little chart they give you in the menu for them, eventually you'll put it together and learn how to balance out your next center of gravity. And there's even 4 different booster slots for you to equip your next with. So you can have completely different booster models in your front booster, your rear booster, your side boosters, you get the idea. All of these, of course, giving unique stats in terms of things like thrust power or energy consumption to each direction of your boosting. Then there's the return of the tuning system from Gen 3.5, only much more in depth now. As you complete certain milestones in the game's campaign and arena, you'll be awarded what are essentially skill points to put into tuning your next. There are way more ways to tune your AC than ever before, and you have way more points to do it with by the time that you reach the end of the game. And again, while I found this menu to be super overwhelming when I first opened it, by the end of the game, I felt like I knew exactly what I was doing, and it just became another part of putting together the ultimate next. Some customization slots have been removed as well, such as inside parts and, more notably, radiators. But the radiators have been removed for a very specific reason. The heat system is completely gone. No longer do you need to worry about using your booster too much. You're free to fly all over the place to your heart's content, further enhancing the power fantasy that the next of Armored Core 4 offer the player. All things considered, the customization in Gen 4 can be a little scary at first because of the insane amount of options and fine-tuning, but once you've spent some time with it, it gives you even more tools to work with to ensure that your next is exactly what you want it to be, and it ends up being a very positive evolution of the system. Alright, so with all the fundamentals out of the way, let's talk about this campaign. The structure is much more simple than previous games, and it was honestly really refreshing coming right off of Last Raven. In Armored Core 4, you will play every mission available in one run of the campaign, and rather than being able to fail a mission and lose the privilege to see what it offers, you get as many attempts as you need to finish the mission, as completing every single mission in the game is required in order to complete it. And while I love the normal, independent mercenary simulator approach that the AC games take, something like this is still really nice, as it feels like you get to experience all the content in one go of the game, rather than needing to restart or resort to cheese for the full experience. And looking back at footage from the early missions of this game, I really struggled to control my next at first. You can see it a lot in my early game footage, especially in the missions where you're moving through tight corridors. I was rarely ever using my quick boost. I was boosting into every wall possible, overshooting doorways, pretty much everything you'd expect from a total noob. This, along with the customization changes, made me feel like I was relearning everything about the franchise, so there's a very clear difference between footage of mine from early in the game and later on. And one of my biggest struggles early on is one that I would never have expected, because it was understanding how much damage I was taking. Easily the largest flaw of this game's core gameplay is that there is little to no feedback for when you're taking damage. There's no slight screen shake, sound effect, on-screen indicator, nothing. What you get is that your AP number will go down, and you'll get a tiny little red number below it, indicating how much damage you actually took from that last attack. Eventually, once I had a better grip on the controls and the pace of the game, I was better about frequently checking my AP, but early on, I would just kind of randomly die without ever even seeing it coming. Anything that I mentioned before, like a screen shake, a sound effect, an indicator, would go a long way in letting players know that they're taking damage, and it's one of those things that you'll never know is good when it's done right, but you'll definitely know that it's bad when it's not done right. And this was one of those cases where I quickly picked up on the fact that it was done poorly. Something else I noticed early on was how awesome the destruction is in this game. FromSoft really went all out with making things destructible, something you'll notice much sooner if you're a big missile user like myself, and it can even be used to approach certain encounters in different ways. There was this one mission where I was getting pounded by artillery while moving through a narrow canyon, and eventually I realized that I could shoot out the platforms that these cannons were set up on simply by going under them and hitting the foundations with a barrage of missiles. It's really fun, it adds to that power fantasy that I mentioned earlier, it adds a lot of style to the game, and I think that it's just yet another great addition here. In general though, early on, I thought Armored Core 4 was by far the easiest game in the franchise. Until I got to Chapter 3. I went from not failing a single mission for the first couple chapters of the game, to getting stuck on the literal first mission of Chapter 3 for almost an hour. In general, Chapter 3 is a very large difficulty spike for this game, but it's not like it gets anywhere near the difficulty of Last Raven or even Silent Line, so it's not the sort of thing where you're going to be overwhelmed by the difficulty, but you're definitely going to notice a sharp increase on your first time playing this game. And while we're talking about missions, I think that the mission variety in AC4 is pretty great. There's a lot of go here and fight the enemies kind of missions, but they're all in unique locations from one another, and there's a bunch of unique objectives thrown in to mix things up, like defending an icebreaker boat while it works its way through a small glacier, or destroying a giant orbital cannon, things like that that just add that little bit of zest to the mission lineup. My only problem with the missions in this game is that some of them require pinpoint precision aiming in a game with a permanent soft lock system. So sometimes you'll be trying your best to aim at a small target or a weak spot while piloting your next, but the target lock has just decided that something else on the very edge of your screen is more important than that. It's something that only happened a handful of times during my playthrough, but god damn is it annoying when it happens. Missions also got a great new system introduced in the projection system. When you take a mission, your employers will project a certain amount of costs that they believe you'll need to cover for your next repairs and your ammo costs. And when you go over those projections, you'll still have to pay for those things, but you'll have the projections deducted from the total amount you owe as the company's covered that much for you. But if you use less than expected, you get to keep the credits that are left over as your employers have already parted with those credits anyway. It's a really small thing, but I feel like this not only adds a little bit of personality to the process of accepting missions, but also an extra incentive for players to perform well while out on those missions. And I hope that this system sticks around instead of just being forgotten like Gen 3's consort system. And if you know me, you might be thinking to yourself, he hasn't mentioned the arena yet. Well, don't worry, because you know I'll never miss a chance to talk about the arena more than anyone actually cares to listen, but I didn't actually touch the arena until really late in my time with Armored Core 4, because I didn't know where it was. They might as well have hidden the arena from me in this menu. So from the main part of the menu, you need to open the submenu where you edit your next, and from this long list of options, Simulator is the new arena in this game. So naturally it makes sense that I never even thought to open this menu until I was pretty deep into the game, but once I actually knew where the simulator was, I had a blast with it. The core gameplay of AC4 is so perfect for a one-on-one fight with another Next, so just having 40 battles where you can do exactly that is a better concept here than it ever has been before. And that being said, I thought that Armored Core 4 had the easiest arena of the entire franchise so far, but that very well could have been because of my build. See, early on in every single Armored Core game, I like to start out with a basic build. I start every single one of these games with a semi-auto rifle and a shoulder-mounted missile launcher. I did that once again in Armored Core 4, and it turns out this can be one of the most powerful builds in the game. The semi-auto rifles are way stronger than they've ever been here, and some of the missile launchers are incredibly powerful. So for most of my arena matches, I would just fly up in the air and fire ludicrous amounts of missiles down on my enemies, often ending battles in less than 30 seconds. And sometimes even less than 15 seconds and not taking a single point of damage. And no, I am not exaggerating. But I want it to be known that even though I thought it was comically easy, I still had a blast with it, and I sincerely hope that Armored Core 4's expansion ups the difficulty of the arena considerably so I get to spend more time of my playthrough on it. And some of you may have realized that I haven't brought the story up at all so far, and there's a good reason for that. I really didn't understand what was happening in this game. From what I can gather, there was a war long before the events of this game where the corporations overthrew the governments of the world, establishing a new world order. And after doing some random jobs at the beginning of the game, you managed to get the corporations pissed at each other, starting an all-out war between them. And I think that by the end of the game, all of them were destroyed, but I'm not even entirely sure about that one. And then the final boss of the game comes out of nowhere, being a Next pilot that you had met 2 missions prior, but in some new giant Next unlike any you've seen before. And the way that the dialogue and the music is set up here, FromSoftware clearly wanted this to be a very emotional fight, but I felt pretty much nothing since I had only met the guy like 10 minutes beforehand. And normally if there are things in a game's story that I don't understand, I'll just look it up before writing my script because I realize that most of the time it's an issue with me and not the game's writing. But the fact that I was really actively trying to figure out what was happening in this game and I got nothing outside of like the most bare bones story summary tells me that this might not be a comprehension issue and this might have actually been the writers not giving enough detail. But ending on a positive note, the music in this game was fantastic. I've never mentioned the soundtracks of these games in any of these videos, and I normally think that they're great, but this one is just on a whole other level. It's a great mix of what I've come to know these soundtracks for, that being electronic music with a lot of bass and piano mixed in, but now they've also introduced a choir and a full orchestra to the mix, and when played at the right time, some of this stuff can bring set pieces in this game to heights the franchise has never seen before.
There's little need for words.
Overall, I went into Armored Core 4 skeptical, knowing how divisive it can be among fans, but I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's the best Armored Core game objectively, but because of the speed of the game, the music, and the supremely satisfying mechanics, it's easily my personal favorite game of the journey so far. It definitely has some issues, big and small, with things like visual direction, some small annoyances in the controls, poor menu design, and a story that's poorly paced and very difficult to follow for a first-time player. But damn if it isn't just really fun to play for hours at a time. So at the end of the day, I'm gonna give Armored Core 4 a 6.6, but on the note that it is also my personal favorite. But what do you guys think? Those of you that have played the game, those of you learning about it for the first time through this video, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, a comment, a subscription, anything to let me and the algorithm know that you did enjoy. It helps me out a lot, so I'd really appreciate it. And if you're interested in supporting the channel financially, consider checking out becoming a channel member or a patron. They start as low as $1 a month, and you can get things like behind the scenes updates, early video access, and more. I've been playing through some of the earlier games on stream recently and getting 100% completion in them, and if we get enough new members or patrons, I'll even work on some bonus videos once the series is done, looking back on the games after a second playthrough and talking about things that I never experienced the first time around. But if you can't afford it, don't worry about it. We've all been there, and your likes, comments, and the fact that you even got to this point in the video have helped out plenty. And hey, if you enjoyed this video and you haven't seen them already, then you definitely enjoy the rest of my Armored Core videos, so I'll have the full playlist linked right here on screen.